You're watching the CNBC TV 18 budget verdict. It is now time for the grand finale. Joining us here on the budget verdict stage, we have a power-packed lineup of the budget makers as well as key policy makers. Please join me in welcoming the CEO of the NITI Aayog, Parameswaran Iyer. Ms. Iyer, could we have you join us on stage, please? Also with us, the chairman of the CBDT, Mr. Nitin Gupta. Mr. Gupta, could we have you join us on stage? The chairman of the CBIC, Mr. Vivek, Johri, also here with us on the CNBC TV 18 budget verdict. Also with us, the DPIIT Secretary, Mr. Anurag, Jain. Mr. Jain, could we have you join us on stage as well? And the MNRE Secretary, Mr. Bhupinder, Singh, Bhalla. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us here at the CNBC TV 18 budget verdict. Appreciate your time and thank you for being here with us in the concluding session of the CNBC TV 18 budget verdict. Mr. Iyer, let me start by talking to you. When we last spoke, you said that you believe that this is a bottom-up budget. It's a budget that has delivered on the aspirations of every constituency across the country. What, to your mind, has been the biggest force multiplier as far as the budget announcements are concerned?
Well, I think there are a couple of things, Shireen. One, of course, is the huge investment in capex, that huge increase of 10 lakh crores. In addition to that, the continuation for another year of the 50-year interest-free loan to states. So extending that and actually incentivizing the states as well to come in with their own capex and attracting private investment. I think those are going to be key. But then if that's going to have huge positive spin-offs in terms of jobs, employment, etc. But the other part of the budget, which I think is equally important, is the thrust on the social sector. And that's pretty much where NITI Aayog is working with states under the State Support Mission, which was referenced by the Finance Minister yesterday, of taking development right down to the grassroots level. How can states create their own state institutes of transformation like NITI? How can they move from planning to development strategy and really take it down to the block level? And perhaps one of the most significant features of the budget was the focus on inclusion, the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, PVTG. So this new mission which has been announced is actually for the tribal community, the bottom rung of the tribal community, 15,000 crores, 3-year in mission mode to provide basic services. I think that was a very, very significant announcement of inclusion.
Yes, inclusion, of course, was one of the strategic priorities identified by the budget. But let me get the CBDT chairman into the conversation. And so, you've got an audience here who currently are perhaps doing their calculations, talking to their chartered accountants, whether they should switch from the old tax regime to the new tax regime or not. And I'm sure there's plenty of feedback that you've got overnight as well. But what is the pitch that you would like to make to the citizens, to taxpayers at this point in time, on why you believe it makes sense to move to the new tax regime?
See, the new tax regime is beneficial to the taxpayers in terms of the money which it is leaving in the hands of the taxpayer. The choice is with the taxpayer to decide whether to opt for the new regime, the proposed one, or the old one where they are as of now. Then there are issues regarding the compliances. The new regime makes it simpler to file the return of income. And as far as we in the tax administration are concerned, the evasion which we have noticed in certain cases is going to be taken care of because wrongful deductions have been claimed by the taxpayers. We have come across such cases in terms of Chapter 6A. So all these things will be taken care of. But as a citizen, as a taxpayer, the choice is with the taxpayer himself or herself to decide what way is beneficial to him or her and choose the option.
Well, yes, that option has been left with the taxpayer, but you also believe that this is, not believe, you do say that this is the new default tax regime. So I want to understand from you, as you were doing your scenario planning, of these 5 slabs that have been now put forward as far as the new regime are concerned, where do you believe you're likely to see people shift to? Within which bracket do you foresee people finding it more attractive to move to, especially cases where HRA, etc. is a factor? Do you believe that that will be a constraint on people making the shift?
We think that at every level the shift will take place. Up to 7 lakh, and in case of salaried employees 7.5 lakh, the shift is definite. from 7.5 lakh income to 15 lakh of income, depending upon the deduction claimed by the person, he or she has to decide whether it is beneficial or not beneficial. And above 15 lakhs, our calculation shows that it will be beneficial to everyone. With the reduced surcharge, above 5 crore, definitely.
Okay, well, that's the pitch that's coming in from the CBDT chief himself to get people to move to the new tax regime. But Mr. Johri, let me come to you with the priorities as far as the CBIC is concerned. And the clear thrust as far as the budget is concerned is to try and bring down the cost of doing business and ensure that there is an improvement in the ease of doing business. And that is what the CBIC is also hoping to do. There has been a significant rationalization, as you pointed out, on the customs front as well. What's going to be the priority this year? What do you foresee as the big challenges as well for you?
Let me begin with customs. And the rate rationalization that you talked about is itself a very big step, because it's a very sharp cut in the number of rates. From 21 to 13 is a very sharp drop. And this is just the beginning of the process. So I think that is one theme that we'll take forward in future budgets, in trying to control rate dispersion. On customs, the major challenge we are facing today is undervaluation of imports. We've been tackling it in the last budget. There was a major announcement made with regard to some changes in the valuation provisions. That is yet to be implemented. The rules have been framed and we have the infrastructure ready for doing that. But in the coming year, we'll see the implementation of that provision. The other aspect which we've been dealing with in customs, more effectively we're trying to deal with it, is the misuse of free trade agreements. And to speak to that, we also made certain changes in law the year before last and in the preceding budgets. That is now settling down, and we'll be in a better position to assess in what manner free trade agreements are being misused, and we'll be able to come up with some policy response to that. On the GST side, although I must clarify, GST is not part of the budget. It is an ongoing process which emanates from GST Council decisions. But on the GST side, also, I think the emphasis is going to shift in 3 areas. One, in expanding the taxpayer base. So, although the taxpayer base has grown quite substantially since the time GST was introduced, when you compare it with other taxes, and that comparison is very often made quite naturally, you find that there is potential to increase the GST taxpayer base. So 1.4 crore is perhaps not good enough for a country of India's size, and we are trying to use technology to come at it, to do more data triangulation, so that we can at least assess for ourselves whether the potential for increasing the taxpayer base has been fully tapped or not. So that's one area, where there's definitely going to be a lot of work done in the coming year.
I want to get both you as well as the CBDT chairman to comment on this, on what you believe the gap is between where the tax base should be and where it currently is at. And you said that that is going to be a key focus area for you. So let me start by asking you, how large is the gap today on the back of what you are seeing, at least from the data that you've been able to collect via the GSTN?
We don't have we can just make intuitive comparisons. So if I were to compare the GST tax base with direct taxes, there's a huge gap. So they're doing about 7 to 8 crore taxpayers. We're doing just 1.4 crore. So that is one indicator that there is enough room, to tap. Also, intuitively about certain sectors, we're very clear that all the taxpayers who ought to be registered with GST are not there. For example, B2C supplies is one area that I'm just naming, for you. Likewise, import of services is another area where we feel that the gap has not been fully closed. So these are some of the indicators that I have, but of course I don't have concrete data to share with you to say that the gap is of the order of so many crore.
No, fair point. I appreciate that. CBDT chief, let me ask you that question as well. How many are still evading the net?
See, we have been regularly pursuing this area, and though as CBIC chairman has stated, it's very difficult to gauge it, But if I take a yardstick of the number of taxpayers which are filing return of income every year, we are finding that like the rate of growth is around 5%. So every year we are finding around 5% new taxpayers are filing return of income. So with that thing, we are thinking that yes, that is the room available as of now. And if we pursue technology and what schemes have already been unfolded during the current financial year, the pace could be better, and that would be speaking about the gap between what the person is on the tax net and not.
Mr. Jain, let me come to you because, as I said, a large thrust on ease of doing business, reducing compliance, as well as encouraging private sector participation across a whole host of industries. I wanted to get your comments and your assessment on where things stand as far as a couple of government schemes are concerned. PLI, various schemes across 13 sectors in various, various forms of rollout at this point in time. Which are the ones that you feel satisfied with, where the progress you feel satisfied with? Where do you believe there is distance to be covered and work is underway to ensure that you push things along? Let me start by asking you about PLI before I get to Gati Shakti.
PLI, as you know, is one of the most important schemes for giving thrust to the and creating global champions. The way we look at it, the sectors which we selected were basically based on whether there is a potential for a particular sector to create global champions in the country, whether this particular sector is of a strategic importance to the nation, or whether does it have a very high employment generation potential. So these are the three tests on which we actually consider a particular sector. But you'll have to understand the way PLI scheme operates. If in year one, I give a particular approval to a particular company, it has to make investments.
Yes.
Investment cycle takes time. So typically in most of the schemes, the investment period granted is 1 year or 2 years, depending on the choice of the company which wants to take the benefit of the PLI. So suppose it takes 1 year benefit. It wants to complete the investment in 1 year. So in the year 2, it will make the investment. Year 3 will be the base year of production.
Okay.
So year 4 will be the claim. So what has happened, some of the news items said that only 15% of the investment has taken place, only 3-4% of the money has been claimed. So let me put it straight. What has happened in most of these schemes, the investment is supposed to be completed over a period of 4 to 5 years. Say typically in a scheme, I say 15% of investment is the benchmark for year 1, 35% is year 2, 65% is year 3, 100% is year 4. So at the end of first year, how much would be the investment? 15%. If you put 15 in the denominator, it will be a 100% performance. And if you put 100 in the denominator, it will be a 15% performance. So in the first year, the actual performance, if you put in the denominator, the target for the first year, it was 106%.
Okay.
Okay. Similarly, on the claims. So the schemes have actually started in different periods of time.
Yes.
So this year, we expect by March that out of 14 schemes, 7 would have got their first claims. Okay. Especially which were the early birds would make larger claims.
Ms. Iyer, let me get you to comment on that as well. Minor hiccups, no major hiccups. And thank you again, Mr. Jain, for explaining how the PLI scheme, the incentives and the claims work, because often that's not understood. And he's absolutely right in pointing out that there have been different rollout timelines across different schemes. We started with pharmaceuticals, and of course that was the very first PLI scheme to be rolled out. And then of course there was the COVID uncertainty as well. But in your assessment, what has been the biggest factors that are working as far as these 14 schemes are concerned?
I think the first factor is the selection of these 14 sectors. That itself has been very significant. And then, of course, it's the industries coming forward, the very close monitoring, and I think the hand-holding and the facilitation for the industries, coordination with the state governments, getting the land acquisition, the electricity, the water up and running. And we do a very close monitoring. And so already about 800 crores, 800 worth of incentives have already been approved. We expect 3 to 4,000 crores before the end of March. And of course, the earlier sectors, pharma, mobiles, they're moving quicker. And I think others are learning from that process. So it's well underway, and we're very optimistic about how this program is going to transfer made in India and manufacturing in strategic sectors in India.
You know, one of the
Sir, may I just
yes,
add
please, sir.
two things. Sir, what happens is the simplicity of the scheme is very important. The claim is dependent only on the production and nothing else. So that is very easy to verify with the GST, tax registrations, etc. So there are no administrative complexities involved in passing the claims. That is one of the biggest and important factors to my mind.
And you're absolutely right. That is a big factor, and certainly a big factor as far as industry is concerned. Mr. Bhalla, let me come to you. One of the areas identified as a priority area has been the energy transition. This has been a budget that has identified the green focus, and an allocation of 35,000 crores, if my memory serves me right, has been made for the energy transition to OMCs, etc. You know, I want to understand from you, there's been a significant distance that's already been covered, especially when we talk about renewable energy. How confident are you feeling at this point in time as the world also makes this shift about India's own goals and aspirations?
Yeah, as you know, India has set a target of meeting 50% of its installed capacity, electricity installed capacity by non-fossil fuels by 2030. We have, right now we are at around 42% of the installed capacity, of the current installed capacity. Of course, looking at what our target is of how the energy would grow, we expect that we will need to add about 200 gigawatts or something of that sort of renewable capacity in the next 7 years. So it will be a spread of solar, wind, hydel, and bioenergy, and so on and so forth. Our expectation is, and what we are moving very confidently towards is, over the next 7 years, we will achieve 500 gigawatt. In fact, while we have committed, internationally committed to install 50% of our installed capacity from non-fossil, but Prime Minister has set a target of 500 gigawatt. So that's what we are aiming at, and we are very confident of achieving it.
What is the constraint or the challenge that you believe you're faced with in being able to get to that target? You know, Mr. Gadkari was here and he said, capital for me is not a problem. I have enough and more of it. How much of a factor is capital, and what are some of the other constraints that could get in the way of you being able to get to the 500 gigawatt target?
See, if you do the numbers, I mean, we have estimated that we will need about 23 lakh crore of investment in renewables for the next 7 years to reach the target. And of course, part of it would come from equity, part of it would come from, the balance would come from a combination of debt instruments as well as bond market. Equity, we are very confident that the private sector would be able to achieve. As you know, we are actually, the expansion of renewable capacity in the country has been spearheaded by the private sector. And the systems have been set, are so robust. And there's so much of excitement when the new, new bids are invited, that I think there's no dearth of investments. In fact, a lot of international investment funding is coming in into the sector. So there will be, of course, financing will be one of the criteria one of the factors which would lead us to reach it, but it would not be a constraint as far as we are concerned.
But, you know, since we have the whole of the government here, in a sense, Mr. Iyer, I'm going to get closing comments from you. You know, the priority that NITI is going to have for the year ahead, and the big opportunity that you believe that the whole of the government needs to focus on.
No, absolutely, Shirin. In fact, just to add to, Gati Shakti now is taking it to the social infrastructure as well. You know, that's another very important part. We are working closely at NITI with Anurag and team and other ministries. So, for example, if you want to locate a tribal school, an Eklavya residential school, or an Anganwadi center, and as you're planning for that, the geospatial context is critical. How close is the nearest railway station? Is there a highway there? So it's becoming really important now to add that layer as well. So that's going to take it to another level. So it's physical as well as social infrastructure planning and development. For NITI, as the whole of government approach, I think one critical area, the two parts, two things I'd like to mention. The FM spoke about the importance of moving from monitoring inputs to outcomes and looking at results-based financing. I think that's a really critical agenda. We will be working through our Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office with selected ministries on a pilot basis in the coming financial year to really look at the huge investment made under centrally sponsored and central sector schemes to not just look at utilization certificates, but are we achieving outcomes and results on the ground through independent verification? So more value for money, I think that will be one major agenda. In addition to that, the continued support to states under the State Support Mission. How can we help states develop their own vision, their own inclusive growth, GDP targets? How do they set up institutes of transformation like NITI? And so I think those will be some of the important priorities for us as we go forward. But of course, we also see ourselves as an instrument for enhancing government effectiveness, both in the Government of India and the states.
Thank you very, very much for joining us here on the budget verdict. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our guests here who've joined us to explain the priorities and the roadmap for the government going forward. But before I let you go, let me welcome on stage Mr. V. Vaidyanathan of IDFC First Bank. We couldn't have put the budget verdict together without his support. It's great to have you back, Mr. Vaidyanathan. Thank you very much for joining us here this evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Secretaries who are present today and spoke so wonderfully well, and Mr. Gadkari. Frankly, it was very, let me say, fantastic hearing all our secretaries speak so well, explain everything so well, so articulate, and a bias for action. It was really very inspiring to see all of you today. So thank you very much for your presence today. It's very hard for me to bring together a 3-hour discussion in 5 minutes, but I'll try. One is that the way we see the direction, that's very important. You know, people are now talking of $5 trillion economy, $10 trillion economy, and clearly the understanding is that first we've got to grow the GDP, we've got to tax the income, and then do welfare, and that sequence is really very important because, you know, we've seen countries like Pakistan and Sri Lanka do go the other way around, and we say where they ended. So that's economics 101, but clearly that's very impressive for our country to aspire like that and clearly set a direction. The second thing is really about being conservative. It was very funny for me to actually watch Shireen Bhan quiz Mr. Malhotra, saying that why are you so conservative? Why are you so conservative? You know, so I imagine maybe a few years ago it would have been the other way around, saying that look, you really can't meet this fiscal deficit target. You really can't get the revenue numbers. So really, this is really a role reversal, and that's very. That makes it that much more credible, in my opinion, and that's credibility is something that's something very, very terrific our government and our country has achieved, and thank you very much for that. Lastly, of course, I'd say that we are all practicing people. We meet investors all over the world, and at our bank as well, we meet investors in Singapore, Hong Kong, US, etc. I can only tell you, to all of you secretaries present here, that the respect with which the international community talks to us when we go and meet them these days for the last 4 or 5 years is very, very high. They start the meeting by saying your country is doing wonderfully well. It is so thrilling. We've seen the economy of 2010, 11, 12, 13. In 2013, it was coming as if India is going down a hole. You know, you saw taper tamper and all that. But actually, it's feeling very thrilling. It's proud to be an Indian and talk because the country, the government has credibility, the fiscal deficit and control, to the extent of fiscal, as I said, it's good quality. So all that. So I can just say that as you know, that's probably just my summary of bringing up the meeting today, that we feel very proud as citizens of this country and as people. We feel very, very good. So when we talk of a $5 trillion economy by $7 trillion actually by 2030, and maybe even $20 trillion by 2047, etc., it is not just a theory. We just really feel it's happening, and this government is really delivering. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is really my pleasure to talk to all of you today. Thank you.
Presented by IDFC First